G'day, folks. In this one today, I'm going to go through my trade and free agency targets for the 2023 AFL offseason. Obviously, free agency and the trade period have started. Apologies for not getting this to you sooner, but I've had a busy sort of last week and a bit. You're basically getting it now as a result. But this is something I wanted to do nonetheless because I do see substantial opportunities across AFL lists. And look, a number of the players I'm going to go through today won't actually be available during the trade period, but they're certainly players I would nonetheless be making inquiries to and saying whether it's this season, whether it's next off season, that I'd be pretty interested. It's fair to say. So firstly, I wanted to go through some of the midfielders, and there's a really clear trend that you'll find with these midfielders. So they're either underutilized from the perspective that they're maybe slightly outside of the best 22, maybe on the fringe of the best 22, or in other instances, they're just not getting the midfield minutes that they deserve and would otherwise be able to get on other teams. So they're the types of players that I'd really be targeting to give greater opportunity or expanded roles to. And that's where I sort of see the value in the midfielders this year. And I think there's really great opportunities to be had. So take a Sam Berry, for example, can't get a regular game in the Adelaide midfield, but for any team needing that sort of contested beast who really brings the pressure, tackles hard, he'd be one that I'd be going to, and probably one of those first names, particularly being so young. But had the 2022 form behind him. So he's someone that I have a lot of confidence in as someone for that type of role. Ben Keays hasn't had a lot of midfield minutes himself. And again, as a result, I'd be pretty keen if I was a rival team to really give him an expanded role. Because again, he does have that sort of game where through the midfield, he wins it contested, and he's got the endurance as well, so he covers a heap of ground. So a real asset there. Harry Schoenberg, probably more on the speculative side, I suppose, where I'm not as strong on him, but nonetheless, for a situation like, let's say, West Coast, he'd be a plug-and-play best 22 piece for a team such as that. So there are still some situations that I could justify him as a potential option. And look, he does also have the scope to go forward and hit the scoreboard. So as that rotating sort of mid-forward, I do think that there are a few teams that he could, get a role for. Jared Lyons, I've always spoken about him as the most underrated player in the competition. And it's just a case of, his 2 years in Gold Coast, of course, I thought he was actually their best player. And then, of course, gets delisted for Brisbane. In his early years, I thought he was probably that next best midfielder behind Lachie Neale, honestly. And then, this year he's obviously gone out of favour. And even with the likes of a Will Ashcroft being injured for the grand final, you've still got Jared Lyons as a sub. So for any other team, I view him as a best 22 player, and with his contested capabilities. And he's got decent skills as well, tackles pressures around the ball well. So I'd be very keen to bring him in. Dane Zorko, look, I haven't tracked his contract situation recently, but if Brisbane aren't sure about holding on to him, I'd be very keen to bring him in. So even a situation like a Gold Coast, where he only has to really move 40 minutes down the road, basically, and I think that'd be a very easy fit, where, look, you don't even need him as a midfielder. The first players I've got on this list are mids, but with Zorko, you can just play him forward and he'll be a weapon. And look, he can pinch it here and there on the ball, and he can still have an impact. He still played good footy for me this year, so I'd more than happily give him another year personally. So Cam Rayner, interesting player on this list. I don't think he's moving this off-season, and I could say the same of, say, Ben Keays, and probably the majority of these players won't be moving this off-season, but again, players I'd target. And with a Rayner, he's just not going to get those midfield minutes for Brisbane. Their midfield's only going to get bigger and better over the next few years. So they'll get Will Ashcroft back healthy. They'll get Levi Ashcroft coming in. So, it's going to be a hard midfield to crack. But with a Rayner, I'd be curious to see eventually how he will look in that sort of mid-forward role. I do think there's a potential missed opportunity there, and there's not really that scope for career expansion as well for a Rayner in Brisbane. So I'd certainly come to him making that offer. And I'd say even more so of the Brisbane midfielders, the one that I really feel misses out greatly is Jared Berry. So phenomenal midfielder. We saw it in his first few years, but he doesn't get the CBAs anymore. And I think that's a real wasted opportunity. So in terms of the players that I'm listing as the best midfielders available, I would say Berry is one of those absolute premium few. And for a club looking for an additional really high-end midfielder, Berry is one I would actually pay up quite significantly for to acquire. So not that he's necessarily seeking a trade, and not that Brisbane would necessarily even contemplate going in any direction towards moving him. But nonetheless, I'd be saying to him, hey, we can give you a primary midfield role, and we can expand your career and make it a greater career than otherwise would be the case with Brisbane. So again, it's the case you can make, but would he accept? Well, look, probably not, but I would certainly be making the call and making that suggestion to him if I'm a team with any midfield need whatsoever. Reece Matheson, look, good mid, and he's been a good mid for a long time, but again, Brisbane's midfield is just so good he can't get games. So again, give him to a West Coast, his best 22 for a team like that. So look, he's only going to take a 4th round pick probably to acquire, so he'd be a very easy acquisition, it's fair to say. Paddy Dow, good piece, but problem is Carlton's midfield is good, so no guarantee is best 22. So, definitely needs a trade, it's fair to say, and I believe he's going to be joining St Kilda over the next week, so we'll have to see how that goes. But they need that sort of burst of acceleration in their midfield, so I like the sort of selection there, and I think he'd be a best 22 piece there, personally. Matthew Kennedy, good mid. I believe it was for the finals he was missing out on selection there, so possibly on that fringe of the best 22, maybe just outside of. So if that is indeed the case, well, he's someone I'd definitely be talking to if he needed that sort of stronger ball-winning mid who can also play forward a little bit. That probably isn't an aspect spoken much about his game, I can't imagine, but he can go forward, take a grab, and hit the scoreboard. So he does have those components, but certainly he's more of a mid. You don't recruit him as a forward. You recruit him as a mid. Lipinski, he's been on that fringe of the Collingwood best 22 where maybe he's just inside, maybe he's a sub. So he's been sort of around that sort of region this year. And look, he did miss the first bit of the season, so we'll have to see there. But look, he's good enough where he could be a more regular on-baller. He doesn't really get those CBAs for Collingwood, and for another team, I suggest he's good enough to actually get that. Whereas that taller midfielder, moving the way he does, he can win his own footy as well, and skills are good too. So, personally, I'm a fan of his game, and look, there could be other teams you could give him an expanded role. So, again, one of those players where you can call up and make the offer without question. And Taylor Adams, well, this is a name that... So I actually completed this document about a week ago now, and Adams was a name I had in there. And funnily enough, actually later on after making this, well, Sydney have made the call to Adams, and he's since requested that trade. So there might be something to my theory of looking for midfielders who don't get enough CBAs. And with Adams, he's been mostly across half forward as that sort of pressure type. He can go through the midfield and has a little bit, but it hasn't been his primary go. So put him on another team where he can get more CBAs, and I think he probably influences winning a bit more. But certainly if he stays with Collingwood, his clear best 22, and a valuable leader on top of that, mind you. But certainly a player that I'd want on my list, and one that I would, again, offer an expanded midfield role to if there was that capacity to make him such an offer. Will Brodie, probably a little bit outside Fremantle's best 22 at the moment, but had a good year last year. Obviously has the contested game, good height, good size. So again, if there's a midfield that has a bit of a weakness, he'd be one where you could probably get him quite cheaply and bring him in. So you could be looking there. Alex Davies, still a developing player from Gold Coast, but he's got the height, but he's a real contested bull. Wins a high percentage of his ball contested. So for a team looking for that and looking more for a youthful option that really has lacked the opportunities to this point, he's one where he has the scope to break out with a good preseason. So, yeah, to give you a bit of a balance of youth, not just your sort of mid-career, your veterans and those types. Yeah, Davies is one where, again, I'm not going to expect a trade necessarily this off-season, but he'd be one that I'd be putting my feelers out to and saying, hey, we might have a position for you in the case that it's a midfield that really needs that sort of extra contested bull through there who can, yeah, really win it well on the inside. James Harms, I think he may have even joined a new team today. Maybe it's Bulldogs. Again, I haven't looked at any of the trade or free agency moves yet. But yeah, obviously has the speed through the midfield and again, underutilized by Melbourne. So put him on a new club list and yeah, he's on a lot of teams going to be a best 22 player. So yeah, definitely one that I like and feel there should be greater opportunities to elsewhere. Travis Boak, underutilized through the Port Adelaide midfield this year, just didn't get the CBAs. He's been good every year up until this year, but yeah, without those centre bounce opportunities, he's just not that same player. So I'd definitely be, if I was in his position, suggesting a move elsewhere to really, yeah, basically maximise his play and maximise his impact. And look, Port Adelaide are a good team. They could, again, contend potentially for a premiership. I think they're probably not quite a top 4 side next year, but certainly I'd imagine they'd be top 8 again. But yeah, again, there should be midfields that should be able to accommodate him because he's a good mid, but it's just, yeah, Port Adelaide's midfield. They're really trying to look at bringing in more of those younger types, whether it's Butters, Rosie, and they're good mids as well. Horn Francis, of course. So, yeah, it's just a bit hard for Boak to get those same opportunities, unfortunately. And I could say similar of Ollie Wines, not that he's at the same stage of career necessarily, but a few less CBAs this year. On other teams, he'd be getting a whole heap. So, yeah, I think on another team, you'd be able to get a bit more out of him than on Port Adelaide with just simply how stacked their midfield is. So, yeah, again, another opportunity. Sam Powell-Pepper, I feel, has been wasted over the years as a forward. And absolutely, look, he can have an impact up forward. He tackles pressures, hits the scoreboard. He's a good piece there. But nonetheless, he has that absolute power to him, where he's got that power, has that burst of speed, wins it contested. So, yeah, look, there'd be teams where I'd be saying, I think there's opportunity to expand his role more to a mid-forward rather than being a pretty well pure forward as he is with Port Adelaide. So, yeah, again, opportunity and one you could call up about if you're after that type of player. And in a lot of cases with these types, I'd really be looking at, well, stylistically, do they offer the type of player that I need? So that would really be what would guide me with who to target in each club situation, because you're really looking for that stylistic fit and that sort of type that your club is missing, because it really means come draft day, as I've said over the years, well, if your list needs are addressed during the trade and free agency period, well, you can just draft the best talent available in the draft, which maximizes the potential quality you're bringing in. But the other thing I'd say as well with these trade prospects is, well, obviously the asking price has to be right. If the asking price isn't in keeping with what you associate their value with, well, obviously you don't go through with the move. So that's the thing you always have to be mindful of. Hunter Clark, look, over the years, he's been underutilized by the Saints, and I believe he's got scope to be a midfielder. I really do. But yeah, it just hasn't happened with them, hasn't received the opportunities, and I think he would just benefit from a fresh start as well, ultimately. I think that would be really the go. And he was seeking a trade last off-season, I believe, but that never came to be. But yeah, with a new move, I think that would be the trick that would help him. If he's going to break out, I think it would be with a new team, most likely. But he certainly has the talent where he can win it a little bit. Also has the speed out of the contest, and his skills are quite good too. So there's a bit there with him. Jack McRae, for me, he was an atrocious choice in terms of just getting dropped later in the year, and also being squeezed out of that midfield even to a greater degree. I just think how he's been utilised has been absolutely disgusting by the Dogs. So I'd be saying to Macrae in a situation such as Melbourne, where, look, if you look at the Melbourne midfield, you've got an Oliver who's a bull in there, you've got a Petrarca who's a match winner. Well, what they really lack is that Macrae who has the skill where he can actually hit those forward 50 targets and has that time and space in traffic to really make those good decisions. So, yeah, I think that's what they lack. And for that sort of situation, he'd be an absolutely perfect fit. And, yeah, again, it's been sad seeing how he's been utilised and how he's really gone out of favour at the Dogs as a result, because he's not half forward. He does his best work in traffic. He's got that incredible evasion and composure in traffic that, other than Pendlebury, well, there's not many others that do. Nick Dacos, yeah, has a bit of that too. But yeah, Jack Macrae is one of those other very rare few that has that with the skills as well. So, yeah, I just think completely underutilized, and yeah, it's just a shame again how it's been used. So there'd be many teams that could utilize that and put it to better use. And with his long contract, he's on big money. So if the Dogs are utilising him again across half forward, they're just wasting their time with that. And I'd say the same of Bailey Smith, where across half forward, well, he's not finding enough for the footy, he's not impacting the game enough. His best play comes across both the wing and I'd say in the centre square as well. So I'd have him in a balanced role. Seeing what he did in that final series across a wing, hitting the scoreboard like he did, he can really impact games heavily there. But I'd also like to see the centre bounces as well, where in that blended role, and you do definitely need those defensive-minded midfielders around him, don't get me wrong, because he is that offensive star. But over the years, a lot of the best midfielders have been those one-way offensive stars. Whether it's your Dangerfields, whether it's your Dustin Martins, well, they're not playing two ways. And Bailey Smith is another from that category where he doesn't come with the same scoreboard impact or forward of centrecraft as those guys do, but yeah, certainly in terms of put him through the midfield or on a wing, and he's going to do damage, even if it is that more offensively minded damage. And skills might not be as good as some of the others, but again, you still get the production, you still get the ball winning, you still get the sheer impact, and he can, by midfield standards, hit the scoreboard. So he does do those things that you want, but again, he's one where, and I'd say similar of a Jack Macrae, you want those right players around them to balance them out. And it works for the Dogs previously when they had Josh Dunkley in that same midfield, where he had that real defensive presence to allow a Macrae and a Smith to exist. So that's what the Dogs really need as that ingredient to really support them. But there would be other teams across the competition where it's very easy to stick a Macrae or a Smith in. So whether it's, as I said before, a Melbourne with a Macrae or Smith, you could really put him anywhere. There's so many good clubs, contending clubs that could very easily fit him in. On to rucks, and I think, and I should have said before as well, with the midfielders, it's a very easy season to find opposition midfielders who are worth adding to your list. And again, with the whole group of them, well, again, they're either underutilized or wrongly utilised. So they're either not playing at AFL level as often as they should, or they're not getting the centre bounce opportunities. And I'd say with these ruckmen, well, they're either being underutilised or they're just underrated broadly. And look, you've got a Goldstein who's already joined Essendon, fair enough. Sensational addition as a short-term pickup, albeit probably for mine the wrong team. He should really be joining a contender at this age and stage. So I would have thought maybe a Collingwood or Carlton would make a lot more sense as those sort of contenders without that great number one ruck. That's my take anyway. But yeah, certainly he's still got the game where he's still a top 10 ruckman for mine. But yeah, going through the list in sequence, and again, you'll find with all these players, I'm not listing them in any particular order. It's just I've gone through each of the team lists and just identified all these players, and I just went alphabetically, so based on team. Ned Moyle, for mine, one of the better younger rucks in the comp, and he'll be the natural replacement for Jared Witts once he retires. Don't get me wrong, but he could step into a number one ruck position sooner. So he is certainly someone that if I was looking for that long-term number one ruck who is really ready now for mine, he would be that younger one that I would be looking at first. So, yeah, I'd certainly make my case to him and say, hey, do you want a number one ruck role now? And if he said, yep, then, yeah, I'd certainly be talking to Gold Coast about bringing him across. Of course, there'd be a lot of reluctance there, no doubt, because he is most certainly in their long-term plans. But you'd ask the question anyway and see if you can strike a deal, if the price can be agreed to, that is. You've got Bruce, obviously very injury prone, that's the issue. So you can't really have him as a depth option because you can't rely on his body. But if you've got a situation where you've got a suboptimal number one ruckman who is adequate but not great, you could bring in Bruce and he might even contend for that number one ruck position. And if he's healthy, great. If not, well, okay, that's to be expected based on what's sort of been happening through his career. But if you can bring him in on the cheap, he'd be potentially, injuries permitting, a good option who can really impose himself on games at times even, I would be saying. So, yeah, he's certainly a name I would be looking at quite strongly because he can play, but again, injuries. So it's just being at the right price. Matt Flynn, good piece. He's already departed GWS. So I'd have to, again, I haven't been following the trade period, free agency, hand up. Haven't been reading articles or anything about it. But yeah, Flynn, I believe, has already left GWS and good addition for wherever he's gone or wherever he's going. But I believe that move has already been made. But yeah, certainly can play and look, not a top end number one ruck by any means with Flynn, but he's a capable number one ruck who, for a team that needs it, is sufficient. So it might be Port Adelaide, I'm going to guess he's gone to. They need a ruck with Lysett sort of, being a bit of a flop of late. So I'm just going to guess that's probably where he's gone. Brodie Grundy, I know he's going to Sydney, and great get for them given, the Hickey retirement has happened. And with Grundy, I called it last off-season. I said on the ESPN podcast at the time, and I'm sure I would have said on YouTube as well, that, Grundy and Gawn is not going to work. And the why, of course, as we've seen, is Grundy cannot play anywhere other than in the ruck. And if you had to push me to say what's his next best position, I'd probably have him as a bit of a shock factor at centre bounces as a tall ball-winning mid. But he cannot play forward. He cannot play back. He is a ruckman. And yeah, by having Grundy, it essentially would have meant that Gawn would have had to have played 90% of his game time as a forward, which, it's just missing out on the opportunity of him maximising his game. So, Grundy's now going to a suitable situation, finally. Collingwood was a suitable situation, and look, it'd be certainly an upgrade over Darcy Cameron for mine, but nonetheless, irrespective, with a Grundy, he'll be a good get for Sydney and a certain upgrade, it's fair to say. And I do believe that Grundy is still one of the best ruckmen in the comp. I still have him as a top 5 ruckman in the competition. But I think a lot of people probably will have forgotten that, of course, given the season that he had with Melbourne, that, it just didn't work out, unfortunately, for him. But Goldstein I've covered. Great get for Essendon, but again, probably gone to the wrong team, in fairness, particularly if he's looking for a flag this season. But to give Essendon a bit of respect, they do have quite a bit of good youth on their list, so they do have scope to improve. The question is, will they? Because they've got top 8 sort of worthy talent on their list, but certainly didn't materialise in this 2023 season, so we'll have to see next year if they can take that next step as a list. Ryan Sampson, he's developed well this year, looking good both as a ruckman and also quite capable forward of centre. So if I'm looking for mostly a ruckman who can, again, play forward, so maybe it's a shared sort of ruck forward role, he could be someone that I would certainly be looking at. Where if you look through these other options, whether it's Moyle, Priest, Flynn, Grundy, Goldstein, they're pure ruckmen. You don't want them sharing the ruck minutes. Goldstein at a push could play forward. But these other guys you want as forwards. So with a Samson Ryan, if I needed that ruck who can also play forward, he'd be the one I'd be inquiring with. And with Nankervis, of course, Richmond's number one ruck, well, there's not the need for both Ryan and Soldo in their depth stocks. It's just they're wasting ultimately two additional potentially good ruckmen. So I could even add Soldo to this list as another who could very reasonably be targeted. So that might be an opportunity in either case for Richmond to cash in and get a pick back to maybe get some youth in this off-season, or some more good youth, because they're lacking in the way of good youth at the moment. For forwards, so I've got some potentially interesting options. A lot of them, maybe all of them just about, other than Burgess, might not be available this off-season, but we'll have to see. But certainly they're players I'd be asking the question of if I needed a key forward. So Jack Gunston, of course, ruled himself out during the finals series and said, look, I don't want to wreck the chemistry. Just keep playing the guys you are, and best of luck in winning the premiership. I think with Gunston, he still has more good footy to play. We'll have to see how his body goes, but I would nonetheless recruit him. And if there's any thinking that he's not best 22 for Brisbane in the upcoming season, which I personally think is madness for anyone making that suggestion, I would be in a hurry seeking out Gunston through the trade period, because he can add to any front half in the competition, and he's a big time asset, certainly when healthy. It's fair to say. Harry McKay, you'll find him to be probably quite an interesting and surprising player for me to be listing. And the reason I do is there were stages where Carlton possibly, you could argue, looked better without him in their front half. So maybe that's the slight opening where if Carlton can get fairly compensated, maybe at a push they could be persuaded into moving Harry. So you can only ask the question at the end of the day, and you can only make your best offer. But if you wanted that long-term great key forward, I think there's an opportunity with McKay, and you could potentially get more out of him than Carlton did in this past season, when of course Curnow was, and rightfully so, the number one option, being the premier key forward in the comp in the last year. So definitely an opportunity there if Carlton can be persuaded. But you could certainly make the case to McKay that we want you to be the number one option, the go-to man, and this is what's going to get the most out of your career. So maybe that case can be made, but if he stays with Carlton, look, they've got genuine premiership chances based on certainly what they did in the second half of this past season. So he probably would want to stay, but nonetheless, you ask the question, because maybe he does have that ambition to be that genuine number one option. Tom Hawkins, he's actually someone I just added today on hearing that, it's not guaranteed that he'll be able to work out a deal with Geelong. So if my understanding is correct, Geelong might be offering 1 year and Hawkins is looking for the 2. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But I'd be saying of a team such as, let's say, Melbourne, that Hawkins would be the most obvious trade target this off-season. And you only need a year or 2 out of him. And if you get him, well, hey, that really increases your premiership odds quite substantially, because Hawkins is still, I would make the argument, a top 5 key forward in the comp, if not certainly top 10, even just based on last year's form. So he'd be an absolute weapon. And with Melbourne's front half really looking, in particular, just lacking that genuine key forward, you've got the likes of Van Rooyen developing. Matthew Jefferson, I still think he's a suspect pick from last year's draft. We'll have to see how that plays out. But you bring in a Hawkins and you maximize their development in both instances, where it's going to supercharge their development and really bring in that experienced player at their position who assists them in their development. So even if hypothetically Hawkins was to be a flop, got injured, or his game declined, or whatever the case may be, well, you're still getting a really, really good mentor for those young guys, where Hawkins has played in premierships. He's been part of a very successful team for a very long time. So that type of experience is invaluable. But additionally, well, yeah, Melbourne, more than any other premiership contender, they've lacked that genuine number one option inside 50. And there are very few better options than Hawkins, certainly in the immediate term. So to me, that would be a no-brainer move. And yeah, if Hawkins can't get that second year, yeah, Melbourne should be picking up the phone and saying, hey, we want you desperately. We need you. You're going to be the key to bringing us another premiership. So, yeah, watch that space. I think Melbourne would be derelict in their duties not to be talking to Tom Hawkins and saying, we really, really, really want you. So, Chris Burgess, underutilised, VFL leading goal kicker this year, probably was the year before as well. But yeah, basically just lacking the opportunities for Gold Coast, which has been unfortunate given how well he's been playing. So yeah, move him to another team, and I think he's a genuine piece. So a name, if you're looking for a no-name, he'd be that sort of no-name, under the radar. A lot of people won't have heard of him, that can step into an AFL team next year and actually play good footy as a key forward, and probably at low to pretty minimal cost. So you might be able to get him for a third or fourth round pick potentially, even with the Burgess, and he can still play good football. So yeah, certainly a name to be aware of there. And I believe he has requested a trade. It might be to Adelaide. I'm not too sure. Again, haven't been keeping up with the trade news. I'm just giving you the names that I believe would be great trade targets. Now onto the key defenders. So Tom Doedee, he's not key defence height, but he's been an asset in Adelaide's defence. Injury prone, mind you, but he's an asset. So he may be leaving. I believe he either will be or has left as a free agent. Don't quote me on it. Again, haven't been following trade and free agency news closely at all. But yeah, certainly an asset towards winning, and one that I would certainly want on my list if given the free shot to do so. Brody Kemp, he was playing good footy for Carlton. Come finals time, got dropped, and he can play, folks. Whether it was at VFL level, playing terrific footy, at AFL level, playing terrific footy, and he's got versatility as well. He can play in defence. You could put him in the midfield or forward if you wanted, and there's still scope to develop. And with more games, I think he's going to keep improving. So certainly one I'd target, and he could be a tall utility. You've got a lot of options with him, but he's been playing in defence and been playing well there. So you could equally just draft him or recruit him for playing there. And given, again, slightly outside Carlton's best 22, maybe you can potentially make a case that, yeah, he could be a target. But look, maybe by the start of next year, maybe he's in there, but a bit of an unknown. And that's why if I thought he'd be genuine best 22 for my team, I'd be bringing in Kemp in a hurry. Tim O'Brien, delisted free agent. I think he's a touch unlucky, honestly. But yeah, he's got the intercepting capability, strong overhead mark, capable enough one-on-one. There's teams that could utilise him. I'm not going to say he'd be a great get, but if you can rookie list him or even just bring him in as a cheap delisted free agent, if you're in need of that type, I think he's sufficient personally. Certainly as maybe a 2-year rental, I think you can't really go wrong with a Tim O'Brien. I'm not going to say he's a great option, but sufficient and can play that role even on a good team. Denver Granger Barras, he has played forward in the VFL, I understand, this year, but I'd keep him as a key defender in the long run and just look to develop him. So for either of the WA clubs, I'd certainly be making the call and seeing if I can bring him in. Again, don't know what his availability is, as with a lot of the players on this list, but certainly one who hasn't really developed to expectation with Hawthorn, I think it's reasonable to say, and may benefit from a change of club where greater opportunity can be had and perhaps even a greater level of continuity too, in terms of keeping him in the one position and saying, hey, look, we're going to develop you as just a key defender and we're going to utilise you to really take a lot of intercept marks, but then also develop you so that you're capable enough to hold your own one-on-one. I think they're really the keys for him in the long run, because that's what he was doing as a junior. And look, he was always skinny, but he was always one-on-one very competitive. So having that, having the intercepting capabilities, reading it as well as he does, he should develop. Should. As long as he's putting in the work and has the good coaching and development around him, there's certainly the scope there. Adam Tomlinson, entirely underutilized by Melbourne, hasn't been best 22 most of the year, and yeah, would make a good key defender for a lot of teams, and certainly any team in need of that. Has great endurance, but yeah, Melbourne's vision, and they've had weird, terrible visions with a lot of players they've recruited over the years, Melbourne, as I've already mentioned with Grundy. But with the Tomlinson, I believe they brought him in to play on a wing, and that was never him. His best spot was always in defence. So it was just, yeah, poor vision at the end of the day in the case of Tomlinson at Melbourne, and he just needs to go to a club where they can say to him, you're a key defender for us, we have a need for one, you're going to be best 22 for us, and he can just slot in. And I think that'd be perfect. Ben McKay, he's already departed as a free agent. Probably Essendon. Again, hand up, I haven't been following free agency or the trade period to know what's happened or where everyone's going. I haven't been too bothered, honestly, with any of that this off-season. But nonetheless, being someone who actively wants to move, he'd be one where absolutely you have to target him. There's absolutely no question whatsoever around that. Where being one of the dominant, both one-on-one key defenders, but then also having the intercept marking capabilities and contested marking capabilities he has. Credit to him for his development over the more recent years, so probably the last 2, 3, 4 years. He's really taken huge steps forward. So credit to him for not just being the worst of the brothers, but he's actually really a very capable player by position and one of the best at his position. So credit to him for taking those steps up. Because early days, I wasn't personally seeing it with him. He didn't have that same intercepting capability as he certainly has developed. So now going through the forwards. So, and with the key position players, more years than not, I've actually got more key position players I like. So it's more sort of the mids and rucks I like. But then also the general forwards and general backs I quite like this year. Again, on a relative basis compared to other years. McAdam, I think he's a more than capable forward. He can be, whether it's a third, fourth option, whatever it is, he's just another avenue towards goal. So he's capable. Kai Lohmann, underutilized by Brisbane, badly underutilized even, I could argue. And in the VFL, he's been ripping it up with huge hauls of goals. So he's definite AFL quality. He's only been on Brisbane's list, I think it's 2 years. But he can play. So, yeah, for another club just looking for that sort of small forward, he's good and he can slot in. He'll hit the scoreboard. He'll provide a capable option. He's looking the goods. So certainly a name to watch out for. I don't think necessarily he's moving. I haven't heard anything. Maybe those who have been reading all the trade rumor stuff have heard something. But yeah, certainly one I'd target given his status being outside Brisbane's best 22 and not necessarily even next year being in there, just given how strong Brisbane's group is, which is really the main reason he's not in there. Reith McGuinness for Collingwood. He's got capabilities really across the ground, but he was looking good in the VFL for Collingwood this year. And really hitting the scoreboard in bunches, but then he's that tall, sort of 190 centimetre type. He can also go through the midfield and win it contested. Great mover. There's a lot of weapons and a lot of scope to develop there still. My suspicion is that next year he could push to be in Collingwood's best 22. And he's a type that I would be going out as another rival team now to target during the trade period and just seeing if I can squeeze him free potentially as someone who, if looking for that sort of medium to tall forward who's another avenue to goal but can also push through the midfield, anyone looking for that type, there is some scope within McGuinness. And I wouldn't overpay for him. I'd only get him if the price is right. But yeah, that's roughly my position there, but certainly a name that I'd be exploring. Jack Ginnivan, on that fringe of Collingwood's best 22, was lucky to actually be inside the best 22 for the grand final. He's probably on that sort of sub-fringe or otherwise just looking for an injury to happen to be just inside that best 22. And look, there's no rumours that I'm aware of him looking at moving to another club or other clubs necessarily really aggressively targeting him. But Certainly, if I'm looking for that sort of small to medium forward who can, hit the scoreboard, he's a really good option. And he's even got scope, which has been a bit unexplored across half forward, even where he's got good skills, which, again, being used close to goal, you wouldn't necessarily know. But there are quite a few options with him. And look, he does still need to mature as an individual, don't get me wrong, but he can play footy, as I picked in his draft year. So, definitely one I'd be exploring if I was a rival team looking to give my front half a boost, if, again, the price is right. Lachie Schultz, I believe he's requested a trade to Collingwood, and good pickup if they can get him, it's fair to say. He's not the top tier necessarily of those small forwards, but he's at the very least a very good B grader. At the very least, clear cut best 22 for Collingwood, and he'd be probably that. He'd be almost nearing a Jamie Elliott in terms of quality in a Collingwood context. So, nearing, possibly not quite there, but nearing, if not there. So, he'd be an absolute asset if he can be had, but it would come at a cost, obviously. So, you'd have to see what that cost is and see whether it's worth it. Peter Bell obviously strikes a hard bargain at the trade table. But, if a suitable trade can be had, he'd be certainly one I'd look at. Tyler Brockman, still a potential pick at this stage. He's not sort of that established great player yet, but he's got the tools, he's got the speed, there's scope to develop there. So, if I'm looking for a speedy forward, he's one I could make a case for being a good option if he's not too pricey or can just be sort of like a throw-in in a trade. That's more where I'd be looking at him. Noah Cumberland, he's a good avenue towards goal. He's developed quite a lot since his junior days and got squeezed out of Richmond's best 22 this year. But I do think there is scope for a team looking for that sort of medium athletic forward who can hit the scoreboard to potentially put him to use. Maurice Rioli Jr. was drafted very raw, and I think this is what a lot of people don't appreciate. He was incredibly raw. What he's always brought to the table and still does is that just absolute manic forward pressure and tackling game. That's what he does, and that's really exclusively his game at the end of the day, and always has been. But he is great at those aspects of the game on a level that rivals anyone in the competition, honestly. And that's not to say that the rest of his game is even good, but being so absolutely top tier elite in that one aspect, there's role-playing potential. And he's not inside Richmond's best 22 this year, and I have doubts he will be next year either. So he's one I'd be making inquiries into now, and if he can be had at a good price, I wouldn't pay a lot for him, but if he can be had pretty cheaply, I would be very keen if looking for that pure pressure forward, because it does impact winning at the end of the day. So, he's a name that I would explore. Looking at defenders, so Trent Bianco delisted, I think he's good. He's got the scope to play whether it's halfback, wing, half forward. There's teams that he could fit into and be all right on. So you can look at those bottom teams, whether it's a West Coast or North Melbourne. I think he'd be best 22 on those teams. So just as a delisted free agent, that's an addition. And he's young, so no reason not to. Jeremy Sharp, for mine underutilised by Gold Coast, he's a weapon, folks. He's got the speed, he's got the skills. I like him across halfback more than I do on the wing. I don't think on the wing he'd find enough of it to have enough of an impact, but across halfback, that's where I like him. So, if you're looking for a weapon who can, really generate meaningful drive and hurt you on the rebound, he's one that I would be looking at very closely. Josh Fay, he's only been in the system a couple of years. He's been ripping it up in the VFL though, and unlucky not to be getting regular opportunities this year. So if he can be grabbed from GWS, you've got a player, I reckon. So not one to overpay for again, but I think he's got a very, very good long-term career. So a name to certainly watch out for, and he's got an absolutely booming boot on him, but it's a reliable good boot at that. So yeah, he's a weapon to look out for. Quite athletic, can intercept as well, so there's some tools there beyond just being a super boot. So he's got some game. Riley Bonner, delisted, so anyone looking for some drive in the form of just like a delisted free agent, very easy addition, and one who can be an asset if that's a role that you need. Could be a bit of a similar case to Oleg Markov, who obviously has become a premiership player. Well, Riley Bonner's no worse than Markov for mine. Might even be slightly better, I could make an argument. So for anyone, any team looking for that type, there's sufficient scope with Bonner to provide that sort of impact. So one to look at. Nick Hoffield obviously has had so many injury issues over the years, it's just been silly, but wants to join the Dogs, and yeah, on a team that can provide him with regular opportunities, I think that'd be great. And again, injury issues have been the thing, but he's got the game to be a really good defender if he can stay healthy and everything can just click for him. Because he's got the skills, he moves really well, he has the speed and agility combination, but he can also intercept really well in defense, and good height is that 190, 191, something around that range. So yeah, he can definitely be an asset for a team, it's fair to say, if his body allows him anyway. Wouldn't overpay given the injury history, but there's certainly the upside there to be a really substantially good defender. Tom Highmore, tall, sort of intercept marking type, I suppose. But he's been very good in the VFL for a few years now. And for any team looking for that interceptor in defense, that sort of medium to tall interceptor, Highmore's a really good one, and he's capable of performing that role to an AFL standard. So lacked the opportunities with the Saints, but yeah, for any team needing it, he's one that I would certainly look at. Will Gould, one of my favourites from that draft, and it sounds like he's become the favourite of a lot of AFL fans out there over the years since that draft as well. But big body, booming boot, strong one-on-one, can mark. So there's a lot of tools there. And yeah, it's just a case of any club needing a general defender, so whether it's a third tall, whatever the case may be, there's scope with Will Gould to carve out a role. So whether it's a rookie spot, whether it's the last spot on your senior list, Gould is suitable for that. And he's got the scope again to play that role if you're in need of it. Hayden Crozier, that athletic marking, intercept marking option in defense, I think he's good enough to be best 22 on a few teams. So he could fit into whether it's, I don't know, it could be Carlton's defense, any reasonable defense that's just that one player short, and you're looking for more that sort of intercept marking medium type. Crozier's a good piece. He's competitive enough. I feel like he's been pretty unlucky not to actually be getting regular games for the Dogs, just being aware of how good he's been in the VFL. So yeah, absolutely. He's one that I'd be very comfortable with if needing that role player. And again, conditional on being available on the cheap. So I'd be talking like 4th round pick cheap sort of thing. Otherwise, there's not much point in exploring him. But yeah, certainly has the scope there to be a role player. And then looking at some outside mids. So Isaac Smith, obviously he won the Norm Smith in 2022 and then is being forced into retirement by Geelong this year. And he's still got the speed, he can still run. So I think for me it's a premature retirement, personally. So I would be trying, if I'm looking for this type of player, to really coax him out of retirement and really fit him into my team. So very much suitable for any contender needing that, that genuine outside run. Elijah Hollands, underutilized like anything by Gold Coast. He is a player, folks. He can play. Put him on a wing, put him across half forward. I like him across those spots. That's fine. You could potentially give him some centre bounces in the future as well. But probably that wing half forward to start with is certainly the way to utilize him. But he's got some weapons. He's a damaging player, and he's more damaging than his brother. So he's a real weapon and someone who really needs a fresh start at a new club just to get those AFL opportunities. And once he's got that, say, 50 games up, I think he's going to be a real piece for a team. And again, given he hasn't played a lot, you'd be hoping you wouldn't have to pay a whole heap for him. That'd be the thing. But if you can get him for a reasonable price, and usually with Gold Coast you can negotiate a pretty reasonable price, based on history at least. But yeah, certainly one that I'd be looking at and trying to get there as well. And then you've got Xavier Dersma. So yeah, the last option that I'd be looking at here, and very good outside piece, but yeah, it's just a case of he's got an awful injury history, but he's been good since his first year. So it's just a case of if you can get him for a good price, he'd be one where he can, if injury free at least, injuries permitting, he has the scope to impact games. So yeah, definitely one that I'd be looking at. And I thought before I'd finish as well, that I'd highlight this website as a tool to help with trading. So this is a tool that's mostly used for fantasy football purposes, but for the purposes of going through this exercise, it's actually been quite helpful, specifically for looking for midfielders who have been underutilized. So I can look at how many centre bounces a lot of players have attended, and I can look at, so you've got Neil, Dunkley, okay, they're playing and obviously attending the bulk of the centre bounces as you'd expect. But then you could look at, say, a Will Ashcroft and think, well, gee, he should be getting a few more centre bounces. Jared Lyons, he's not getting a lot, but of course the context there is he's been sub a lot, so that's been the issue. And then you can look down the list and see, well, Dev Robertson, okay, he should be getting more. Cam Rayner should be getting more. Jared Berry, that's atrocious. He should be getting a heap more than 6% CBAs. And it's nice seeing this 71 here. That's probably what he should be getting on another team. But then you can look through the other games and realize, oh, gee, he hasn't been getting any centre bounces at all. So this has been a really good tool to go through and really determine that certain players aren't getting enough centre bounce opportunities. So you can look at a Taylor Adams, who'll be somewhere here, so 39%. He should be probably getting a bit more than that in terms of those centre bounce opportunities. So you can do that with any team. A Lipinski at 3% is worth more than 3% centre bounces for mine. So it's a way where beyond knowing simply who is underutilized, who should be getting more games, you can look at the centre bounces and think about, well, are there players who should be getting a heap more centre bounces than they are? So you could look at the Dogs and think about, well, let's have a look at Jack McRae, 36% CBAs. Well, that's pretty poor to say the least. So he's ripe for trading. And as far as I'm aware, hands up, don't know if it's been the case, but yeah, Jack McRae's one where certainly I believe he should be traded. There would be other teams he could be utilized substantially better on, and there's other teams that he should be getting at least double the CBA percentage that he got this year for the Dogs, it's fair to say. And same could be said of Bailey Smith as well, where 30% CBAs, well, unless he's playing the other 70% of the time on a wing, that's not nearly enough for him based on the sheer quality of his game, in fairness. So, yeah, just one tool that I'm utilizing it for a very different reason to how most people would. Most people would look at this website and think, oh, fantasy football. But in my instance, just having the mind for the list management space and the draft periods, it naturally gravitated towards this form of utilization. So, yeah, for those that are into the trade period and all your fantasy trade scenarios and thinking about, well, which players or at least which midfielders aren't getting enough centre bounces and might be underutilized, well, yeah, come to this website and, yeah, have a think about who's not getting a lot of centre bounces would, if they were traded to your club, potentially get that. So, yeah, thought I'd let you in on that one, and that's probably what helped me have such an expansive midfield list. But it's also a year where I've just never seen this many good midfielders being underutilized just broadly, and it sort of, I guess, further triggered my mind towards, yeah, utilizing this website for that purpose. So, but yeah, in the comments section below, let me know what you think of some of the players I put forward as potential trade or free agency prospects. There's certainly a number that won't be traded, as I've already sort of mentioned earlier. that won't be trading hands that probably should. But yeah, there's a lot of players that, albeit some are quite creative, that would, in my opinion, at least benefit from a move and look better on other club lists. So that's really, I guess, what motivated me with a lot of the players I've mentioned today. But yeah, anyway, folks, see you in the next video.